Hi, my name's Jennifer, welcome back to my channel. Oh, the Santa, are you messing? Hi, my name's Jennifer, welcome back to my channel. This is a film that I have been planning for a little while and I'm finally getting around to filming it today. So in this video I want to recommend to you some books which were adapted into Hitchcock films. This is not an exhaustive list, obviously many of Hitchcock's films are based on books. But there are 5 books on this list. I have read all 5, I would recommend all 5, and I've also watched all 5 films which the books were adapted into, and I would recommend those 5 films as well. So, the first book that I want to talk about it was adapted into what I think it's fair to say is Hitchcock's most famous film, and that is Psycho by Robert Bloch. The novel was published in 1959 and it was made into a film in 1960, so only a year later. The story, I'm sure we know the story of Psycho, but it's about a woman who is driving late at night in the dark, there's a storm, and she decides to seek refuge in the Bates Motel, which as it turns out is a very bad decision to have made. Robert Bloch was inspired in part by a real life case which took place not far from where he was living, and he has said that he was inspired by the situation rather than the person, and it was only after having written Psycho apparently that he realised how many similarities there are between the real life case and what happens in this story. The film stars Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh. When the film was in production, Hitchcock had one of his assistants go out and buy up every copy of the book that they could get their hands on so that the public wouldn't be able to read the story and find out what was going to happen in the film. Apparently there were no advanced screenings permitted of the film, and viewers were not allowed to enter the theatres once the film had started. Hitchcock's cameo in the film takes place relatively early on, apparently in an effort to not distract viewers who would be looking out for his cameo. So in most but not all Hitchcock films he does make a cameo, and I think as his career went on he tended to move his cameos to be earlier on in his film so they wouldn't be distracting the viewers and taking away from the story. This is the only book on the list that I read after having watched the film. I only watched Psycho for the first time a few years ago, and I think it was only when I watched the film that I realised it was based on a book. For all the other books on this list, I read the book before watching the film. I would say that the film is fairly faithful to the book from what I can remember. I know as I was reading the book, not long after having watched the film, it almost felt like I was watching the film again because it was very true to the same story. Robert Bloch did write a couple of sequels to Psycho, but the sequel novels bear no relation to the sequels of the film. So I think if you like the film Psycho, which you've probably seen, then you're probably going to get on with the book Psycho as well. The next book that I wanted to mention is, of course, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So this novel was first published in 1938 and Hitchcock made it into a movie in 1940, so only 2 years later, starring Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. So the story of Rebecca, I'm sure we all know, it's about our unnamed narrator who falls in love with Max de Winter, and they get married and they go to live in Mandalay. And Rebecca, who is Maxim's first wife who has died, is sort of haunting their marriage. I think the movie Rebecca is fairly faithful to the novel. There are some smaller differences, and there is one difference which I would say is fairly significant, which takes place towards the end of the story. So I won't say what that is because that would be a spoiler. But the reason that it was different in the movie compared to the book is because of the Hollywood rules that were in place at the time, which meant that there were certain things you couldn't portray on film. There were certain storylines and plot lines that you couldn't have in your movies. So that was why there are some fairly significant changes. The film was nominated for 11 Oscars and won Best Picture and Best Cinematography. For me, one of the best things about the film is the character of Mrs. Danvers, who is portrayed by Judith Anderson, and I think it's a really great portrayal. There are some differences, I think, between the Mrs. Danvers character between the book and the movie, but I think the essence of the character is portrayed so well in the movie. And there was another movie of Rebecca made, I think, in 2020, which I have watched, and it was pretty terrible, so I would not recommend that version. We're going to stay on the same theme for a moment, and we have another Daphne du Maurier story. This time a short story, and that's The Birds. The story was first published in 1952, and Hitchcock made it into a movie in 1963. Out of all of the books on this list, The Birds is the one which the adaptation is really quite a loose adaptation. Hitchcock really only took I think the central idea of birds, obviously, attacking people. He changed a lot. So the original story centres around a farmhand in Cornwall. Obviously most of Daphne du Maurier's books are set in Cornwall. Hitchcock, for The Birds, moves the setting to California, and we follow this female main character who's played in the film by Tippi Hedren. Du Maurier was said to have been inspired to write this story after witnessing a farmer being attacked by a flock of seagulls. At its time of the release, the film got mixed reviews, but over time I think it has come to be recognised as one of the sort of classic horror films. There is controversy surrounding the film, particularly in terms of Hitchcock's treatment of Tippi Hedren. There is a scene towards the end of the film where Tippi Hedren had apparently been told that mechanical birds were going to be used for this one scene, but however they did actually use real birds, which would have been terrifying. There was a third Daphne du Maurier book which was made into a Hitchcock film, but I haven't seen that film, and that's Jamaica Inn. So I won't talk about that in any detail. I have read Jamaica in the book but not seen the film, so let me know if you've seen the film, if you think it's worth a watch. So the next film I want to talk about is Suspicion, which was released in 1941, starring Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine, who was also in Rebecca. Suspicion is based on a novel called Before the Fact by Francis Iles. Francis Iles was a pen name of Anthony Berkeley Cox. Under Anthony Berkeley, he wrote detective fiction like Golden Age detective fiction, and under Francis Iles, he wrote more psychological thrillers. The book was first published in 1932, and we follow a married couple. We see them at the start of their relationship, falling in love, getting married, and it's basically a story of the wife who believes that her husband may be plotting to kill her. And the whole story is really a case of, is she paranoid, or is her husband really planning to kill her? The film does have one fairly significant change from the book, which I won't say what that is because it would be a spoiler. But it's interesting if you've read the book or watched the film. If you look it up, you can see what the change was, and it's interesting in terms of the reasons why the filmmakers and Hitchcock decided to make that change from the book. I personally prefer the ending of the book. And the final book that I want to recommend is what I think is one of the classics of the crime fiction genre, and that is Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. It was first published in 1950, and it was actually Patricia Highsmith's debut novel. I have read several Patricia Highsmith novels, by no means all, but Strangers on a Train is my personal favourite of the ones that I have read. Hitchcock made it into a film the following year in 1951. The reason why I personally love Strangers on a Train so much is just the setup. I just think it's such a great setup for a crime novel. So we have two strangers who meet on a train. They both have someone in their lives who they would like to get rid of, but were they to do so, they would be the obvious suspect in that murder. But what they then agree to do is to swap crimes, so they'll murder the the one who the other person wants to be got rid of. Apparently Hitchcock had some difficulties in getting this movie off the ground because because it's adapted from a debut novel. A number of screenwriters who were approached didn't want to participate in the project, such as John Steinbeck, Dashiell Hammett. Raymond Chandler did join the project. However, when he submitted his second draft of the script, Hitchcock apparently put it into the bin while holding his nose, so Raymond Chandler then left the project as well. There are some small differences between the book and the movie in terms of one of the main characters' names is different, their occupations are different, and there is a certain scene towards the end of the movie, which I won't go into detail about, but that scene is actually lifted directly from another book. Here we go. From The Moving Toy Shop by Edmund Crispin. So there's a certain scene in this book which Hitchcock lifted and put into his movie, and apparently Edmund Crispin was not credited with that, which is slightly odd. The Moving Toy Shop is like a golden age detective novel which was first published in 1946. Apparently the film Strangers on a Train received sort of mixed reviews at the time, but I think it is generally deemed to be one of the classics in crime films, as the book is a classic in the crime fiction genre. So those are the 5 books that I wanted to recommend to you today. Let me know if you've read any of them, what you thought of them, and let me know if you've read any other books which were adapted into Hitchcock films, because there are a couple that I have my eye on that I would like to get to at some point. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. Bye!